Welcome to Missouri Law Matters, a podcast all about your Missouri courts. My name is Matt Hamner. I'm a judge on the Southern District Court of Appeals here in Springfield, Missouri. If you've enjoyed what we're doing, don't forget to like and subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify. If you like to see our smiling faces, don't forget to look us up on YouTube. Also, don't forget to go to the Missouri Supreme Court's Instagram, Facebook pages, and all the various places you'll find them on social media. We also have a new Missouri Courts page, which talks more generally about our court system in the state. Go to those pages, interact with our posts. I'm really excited about today's episode. One of the reasons that I was drawn to this podcast in the first place was because I thought it would give me an opportunity to shine a light on some of the incredible people that work in the Missouri judiciary. It takes special folks who are willing to subject themselves to the stress and the long hours that can come from working in our court system. To do it for certainly less money than they could be making doing something else is something that takes somebody that is truly special. Being a civil servant is something that can get your blood, and no one embodies that more than my next guest. He has spent decades in our judiciary serving the citizens of the state of Missouri, and even after his retirement, has continued to serve as a senior judge and work on multiple projects for the betterment of the citizens of the state of Missouri and for the betterment of our judiciary. I'm very excited to talk with him about his incredible career and why he is still working so hard for our courts even long after he is retired. Joining me today is Judge Gary Lynch. Judge Lynch is currently a senior judge with our court. He is a former member of the Southern District Court of Appeals. Judge Lynch, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Judge Hamner. Good to be here.
I appreciate you taking the time out. Most of the time when I mention that somebody's retired, people envision them on a beach somewhere or with their feet up on a porch. That is definitely not you. And scheduling you was a challenge because you had lots of things going on. Why do you stay so busy? How do you stay so active?
My wife keeps asking me that very same question. I just love being engaged. I like being productive. That my entire life has been engaging in projects, working, doing, being productive. And I just didn't want to sit down in a rocking chair and start drooling out the side of my mouth. I want to stay engaged. I will say that I have enjoyed a little slower pace since I have retired. I tell my wife before I retired, I generally ran about 100 miles an hour per day. And now I notched it back to about 60 miles per hour. And it's nice to take things at a little slower pace.
And certainly most anything would be a slower pace than being a full-time active judge in our judiciary. And I know you have a lot of experience with that. I want to talk to you about that. But one of the things I always like to talk with my guests about, the first thing is to tell people your path to the law. Where did you start? How did you gravitate into the law and through school? And then what ultimately led you to the bench? So let's talk about where you grew up and how you gravitated towards the law.
I was born in St. Petersburg, Florida. My family moved to Arkansas when I was 11 and then moved to Missouri when I was 15. I'm the middle of 5 kids. My older brother went to Georgia Tech, but then mom and dad were looking at putting 4 more kids through college. My older sister found a Southwest Baptist College in Bolivar, Missouri, and visited on a high school day. She and I went to high school day. Mom and dad looked around Bolivar and decided what they could do to help their kids get through college was to buy a house across the street from the college and live there. And then the kids could figure out how they were going to get through school. And that's what happened. 3 out of the 4 graduated from Southwest Baptist College in Bolivar. I started out as a music major. I wanted to go into vocal music, but found out in the first semester I didn't have the ear for it. And so I was taken with elementary ed, the education side of it, and thought that I could be helpful in the education teaching in the elementary school and then maybe eventually going into administration. So I changed my major to elementary ed. I needed to get a math prerequisite in. So the only thing that fit into my schedule was Calculus 1. I took it, I liked it, so I ended up getting a double major in elementary education and mathematics. My junior year in college, I started dating this gal, who's now been my wife 51 years, fell in love with her, and started having real doubts that I could support her and a family on a teacher's salary. And I was involved in student government, and a friend of mine in student government told me he was taking the law school admissions test. Why wouldn't I take it? So I took it just on a lark and did well enough to apply to some law schools and got accepted. That's launched my career in the law.
It's so funny to hear you tell that story because we've had numerous guests on, and it always is amazing to me. We get this mix of people who they knew they wanted to be a lawyer from the beginning, from high school, and they go to college and they're like, I want to be a lawyer. And then we have this mix of people who had absolutely no intention of becoming a lawyer at any point in their lives whatsoever. And they get to the end of their college and they're like, I don't really know what else to do. I might as well become a lawyer. That's great. I love that. And it's just proof again that I always tell people that the law is a really big tent. And whatever your skills are, whatever your passion is, we've got someplace in the tent for you. We can put you somewhere in the law. And I love that you found your way into it through that path. That's amazing.
And following graduation from law school, had the opportunity to interview with law firms in Kansas City and St. Louis, the Attorney General's office in Jeff City, or come back to my hometown and practice law in my hometown with a small father-son firm. My wife and I debated the pros and the cons and made the decision to go back to our hometown and invest our lives in the hometown. And we'd never looked back. That was a great decision for us and our family.
What was it, do you think, that kept you guys in Bolivar, that kept you from jumping at one of the other opportunities?
It was familiarity, but also we knew we wanted a family and thought we enjoyed our teenage years there and thought that would be a good place to raise a family.
I certainly understand that. I think I've told before, out of law school, I ended up in Kansas City for 5 years working in a firm there. But once I got married, once we had our first daughter, it was like, I would really like them to grow up where I grew up, and I'd like them to have that experience. So we moved back to Lake Ozarks, which is where I'm from originally.
And to grow up around family.
Yes.
Yeah, and that can happen in a large city. I don't mean to
Of course.
talk about the location there, but that was the draw. My parents lived in Bolivar. My wife's parents lived in Bolivar. Her grandparents lived in Bolivar. So it was a chance for our children to grow up with extended family nearby.
It was the home that you would always know. And to go back and to take the talents that you had developed, both at SBU and then ultimately in law school at Mizzou, to take those talents and take them back to the community that had invested in you when you were a student, to share that with the community is a wonderful thing. We need more of that.
We've been blessed by it, and hopefully our community's been blessed by us being there.
Now, when you moved back to Bolivar, what kind of law did you practice?
It was a general practice, a father and son duo. His father had started the firm in 1912 as a sole practitioner, and then the father had joined his father, and then his son joined the firm. I was the first non-family member that was in the firm on it. But it was established. What the father told me is whatever walks in the door, we'll take it because we're here to help people. And even though we represented institutions like Southwest Baptist University and local banks and school districts, probably 75% of our practice was representing individuals with problems that needed to be solved and help they needed in their lives.
And that is typical of a lot of small town firms in the state of Missouri. You were in private practice for a long time, but at some point you found your way to the bench there in Polk County. How did that come about? What is it that attracted you to becoming a judge and drew you to the bench?
There were times when I could see how problems should be solved that didn't necessarily align with how the other side wanted them solved, or even how my client wanted them solved. And so I started getting the idea that I might be helpful in the area of resolving disputes in a fair and even the impartial. We take that for granted when judges say, I want to be fair and impartial. But those are two big foundational principles in the judiciary, is finding the people that can be fair and impartial and reach a just solution to a problem or an issue on it. And I started feeling like I could perhaps do that.
And so you became associate judge in Polk County.
Associate judge in Polk County, and I was elected in November of 2002. and took the bench on January 1, 2003.
Now, for those that may be listening to this, what types of things does an associate judge in Polk County do?
At that time, Polk County had one associate circuit judge. Your population in the county has to exceed 30,000 in order to get a second associate circuit judge. And Polk County was at just under 29,000 population. So I was the single associate circuit judge for the county. And so I got to do everything: probate, civil cases up to a certain size, criminal cases. And then within our circuit, the circuit judge had adopted a local rule that the domestic relations cases, all the family law cases, went to the associate circuit judge. So I did family law and did a little bit of everything.
My circuit had the same rule.
Which was very similar to what our law firm had done. It was a little bit of everything. And so it wasn't much of a transition for me to do a little bit of everything as an associate circuit judge. And personally, I liked it because every day was different. And that was nice.
I've talked to a lot of judges. I get that answer a lot. And certainly that's the answer I've always given. My favorite thing about being a judge it is different every single day. Though we see the same types of cases a lot, every single case is different. Every one of them is different. And they have different facts and different factors that go into them. And it's really fun to know that walking in the door every day, that it could be completely different than it was the day before.
And solving a different problem. Just going at it, hopefully doing a good job on it, every one of them.
Absolutely. What is one thing that you really miss about your time as an associate judge, and what's one thing you don't miss?
As associate circuit judge, a trial judge, you interact a lot with attorneys who are handling a lot of cases, and they're officers of the court. So you're relying on them and working together. You're talking to them, you have dockets together and those things. And that type of interaction was actually a step down in a way from the practice. In the practice, you interact with all the other attorneys, but it's in phone calls at that time. We didn't have text, but it was phone calls, just beginning to do the email thing. But the interaction with the attorneys was a constant everyday thing. As associate circuit judge, I still got that, not as intense as it is when your adversary's on it, friendly adversary, so to speak. But I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed the fact of moving things along. And in the trial bench, you make the decision. Now, that's a burden and a benefit. A burden in that you really try and make the right decision. But the benefit is you don't have to consult anybody. You make the decision. The case goes along, it moves along, and hopefully gets resolved on it. And so I missed the interaction with the attorneys, and I missed just making the decision on my own in some respects.
Anything that your time as an associate judge, you're like, man, glad I don't have to do that anymore?
Oh, no, I really liked the trial bench. I remember a day that I got a call from a former attorney. We had practiced across from each other on family law cases. We always had a wonderful professional relationship. And she called me up and said, Gary, there's going to be an opening on our court in the future, and I think you ought to think about applying. And I laughed. I said, I love the trial bench. I can't imagine anything worse than just sitting around writing opinions all day, research and writing opinions. Thank you for thinking of me, but no thanks. I went home that evening and told my wife, you'll never guess the phone call I got today. I explained to her, and we had a good laugh and didn't think anything more about it. But over the next 3 or 4 months, it was in the back of my mind. She had planted a seed, and it blossomed into maybe it wouldn't be as terrible as I thought it would be. And so I decided to apply. And of course, that's under the nonpartisan court plan, which is different than partisan elections.
Now, how many years had you been on the trial bench at the time you decided to apply for the Court of Appeals?
Right at 3 years.
Around 3 years. And so at that time, you go through, as you refer to it, the nonpartisan court plan. There's a commission that you submit an application to. You interview with that commission. What was your experience with that process? Did you enjoy that process? Was it daunting in any way? What did you think about it?
I really enjoyed it because I got the appointment. But seriously, There were 25 of us that
Oh, wow.
applied,
That's
and
amazing.
it was my first time applying. It was just a tad different process in that time, in that you didn't have the public interviews with the whole commission. You had private 20-minute interviews with each individual commissioner. And you really met, the commissioners are great people, and you really have wonderful conversations with them. It was a good experience in that regard. And then when I made the panel of three that were some names submitted to the governor, that was on December 21st. 4 days before Christmas, I made the panel. And then over the Christmas break, we interviewed with the governor. And then I got the call on January 6th. And I can still remember the court clerk. My clerk came in the office saying, the governor's on the phone, Judge. That's a good call.
It is.
You've had that.
I've had that experience. Unfortunately, mine new technology and such.
Yep.
He calls my cell phone, and I look down, and it says Missouri governor, and I'm like, oh, okay.
Well, there you go. Yeah, that's a good call.
It's always a good call to get. And so you started on the Court of Appeals in 2006.
2006.
So not quite 20 years ago.
Right.
And then you were on the Court of Appeals until 2022.
In 2022, the 1 minute before I turned 70 years old. A lot of people don't know that Missouri has in its constitution mandatory retirement for state judges. I was a little bit resentful of that fact. This side of retirement, it's okay. I think it's a pretty good rule right now.
So you spent a large amount of time, a little over 16 years. Tell me a little bit about your experience as an appellate judge. You did it for 16 years.
Oh, I loved it. Typically, decisions on the Court of Appeals are made by panels of 3 judges. And when you've got 3 people, then the decision is 2-1. Almost universally, our decisions were 3-0 because we really worked to get to the right place. I think every court in Missouri, the appellate courts in Missouri, are the same way. The judges really want to know what are the facts, what is the law, and oftentimes that can be a little more difficult than what you would think. And then how, if you apply the law to those facts, what is the result? And in some respects, I've heard it referred to, I had died and gone to lawyer heaven because I got to work not in an adversarial way with my colleagues on the Court of Appeals, but in a way that we had a common purpose to get to the right result. And that's very satisfying and professionally satisfying, and I really enjoyed it.
I love to hear you describe it that way because I've had people ask me the same question about what's it like being on the Court of Appeals, having come from the trial bench. What I've generally told them is that this is more of a problem-solving job.
No question.
It's not just, you're not advocating for a party. You're not necessarily trying to put out fires or quell some dispute between folks. You're trying to find the solution to a problem. And you're working with incredibly smart people to try to figure out the solutions to these problems.
That's exactly right.
And that is really exciting. It can be a lot of fun to do that.
It is a lot of fun, and it's very rewarding to do that. It's really intimidating in that you can't just say this party wins, that party wins. You have to explain in a written opinion that goes to 30,000 lawyers in the state, and you have to put your name at the bottom of the opinion that you wrote that. That can be really intimidating. But it's a way of accountability. And that's the wonderful thing about the rule of law. You make it public, you make your thinking public, and then the public judges, have you gotten it right or not? And I like that. Initially, it's pretty intimidating.
I can tell you now, as being not quite 2 years into this gig, that it is very intimidating when you start this job. And as a trial judge, you issue a lot of orders, but they're not generally widely published. They generally go to the parties that are participating in the case, but not much farther beyond that. As an appellate judge, the work that you do, the opinions that you write are widely disseminated. They are available pretty much to anybody with a computer or an internet connection.
That's correct.
I know how much you love being an appellate judge. I talked to you before about your time here and all the incredible work that you've done, the people that you've gotten to work with. But even despite all of the work that you did as an appellate judge and doing that job, you were also very active in committees and organizations and such while you were on the appellate bench and working both with our Missouri Supreme Court and the committees that they have, but also on other organizations. Tell us a little bit about the projects that you worked on while you were a judge that were outside of your duties.
I felt incredibly honored and privileged to serve on the Court of Appeals. And with that, it seemed to me a responsibility to leave things maybe a little bit better than I found them. I'll leave it up to others to judge whether I was successful or not. And I thank the Supreme Court for this. It was a real confidence builder when they asked me to chair the committee to review and make recommended changes to the Code of Judicial Conduct. There are court rules in the state. The first rule number 1 is these are the court rules. Rule number 2 is the Code of Judicial Conduct. How do judges conduct themselves? What are the rules of ethics for judges? Because that's the bedrock of our system, okay? And to be asked to chair that committee and review that and make recommended changes to the Supreme Court in that rule was incredibly a confidence builder for me. And so that was the first thing. The second thing is just because of the rotational process on our court, the Southern District of the Court of Appeals, I was slated to become chief judge of our court very shortly after I came to the court. I started looking for some background on how to do it, and I came across an organization called the Council of Chief Judges of the State Courts of Appeals, which is a national organization of chief judges of the intermediate appellate courts in the 43 of the 50 states that have intermediate appellate courts. And so I got involved with that organization and went to their annual meetings and made friends with other folks that were chief judges all across the nation, and was fortunate enough to be asked to move into the officer rotation, and eventually served as president of that national organization in 2012, 2013, which I still remember at that meeting. One of our guest speakers was Justice Clarence Thomas. And I got to have breakfast with Justice Thomas and visit with him and just highlight of your professional career.
What a neat experience.
Interact with a justice on the United States Supreme Court. Not only that, but he's my idol in that regard, just because of his independence, independent thinking, and his willingness to state that and to stand by his principles on it. But at any rate, that was a wonderful year that I got to engage in that. From that, the Council of Chief Judges associates with the National Center for State Courts, which is the research and education arm of all 50 state court systems in our nation. And it is owned by the Chief Justice of those 50 state court systems and the 50 state court administrators. And I was asked to serve on the board of directors of the National Center for State Courts and did that for 6 years. Really enjoyed the work, seeing all the different court systems and how they work, provide education and research about those systems. We think of the federal court system. They make the news a lot because of some of the federal cases, but actually, I think it's well over 95% of the legal cases in our country are decided in the 50 state court systems. And so most of our justice system is in the state courts. And I'm not putting down the federal system. They do a great job. But for the average United States citizen, it's the state court system that resolves those legal issues.
Absolutely. For the average folks, if they're going to have interactions with the court system, it's most likely going to be your state court.
That's it. And once again, to have the opportunity to work with people all across the country, professionals all across the country in addressing these issues is great. While I was doing that, I had been involved in court automation in Missouri. Being a judge and interested in the automation issues on technology and how courts could use technology, there was a vacancy for the chair of the Missouri Court Automation Committee, and the Supreme Court, the Chief Justice, Patty Breckenridge at that time, asked if I would consider serving as chair of the Court Automation Committee. And my wife thinks I just can't say no, but it's hard to say no to the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. I took that on, and really is a lot of hard work, but very enjoyable, and working with tremendous people.
For those that are listening who may not know what court automation is, can you explain a little bit about what that project entails?
Sure. And it dates back to 1994 when the legislature passed authorizing legislation saying essentially we need to use computers in the court system, because there were courts at that time that were not using computers. There were many that were using computers, but they all used a different program. So it was a patchwork quilt of different programs that didn't talk to each other. Trying to accumulate numbers to help you evaluate what kind of jobs are being done by the courts was just a nightmare. And so the legislature said, look, we're going to set up a framework that we can automate. They called it automation, but we can automate the courts with technology and do a statewide system rather than this patchwork quilt of systems or no system at all. And so the Court Automation Committee started that project in 1994, rolled out a case management system that was purchased from a third-party vendor in 1998, and then went about the process of implementing that through the state for a number of years. That system, by the time I became chair of the Court Automation Committee, was old and was becoming obsolete and no longer supportable. So my task was to help develop that second generation case management system. We are just now finishing, not even finishing, it'll never be finished because it always changes. But we now have a system that can address that change quickly and is much easier to change and responsive to change than the prior system. So
I tell people that when they ask me how the courts are utilizing technology, I say it's just like your house at home. When you buy a computer, it works great for 3 or 4 years and it does everything that you need it to do. But then as the programs get more complicated and as the operating system gets bigger and bigger, you got to upgrade your computer. And at your house, it's real simple. You just go out and buy a new one. You put a new one in there. It's great. Our house is judges all spread across the state with clerks and other people that work for them. And so we can't just buy a computer and put it on everybody's desk.
How do we make those all work together? The networking of them, but also the software in a productive manner. You never want to use technology for technology's sake. And you never want to use technology to make things more difficult. You want to use technology so that we can do better. We can get more reliable results in a quicker fashion with a greater access to justice. And that access to justice is really important in the technology area. If you only have so many man hours you can use, and the demand for doing things is high, you've got to find a way that your man hours can be used most effectively to address the need. And technology offers that. And I have to say, I am so proud of Missouri being a leader in this area. We take it for granted. CaseNet. Most states don't have anything near like CaseNet. The online interface available to the public. Missouri's a leader and has been a leader in that respect. Our statewide case management system is the envy of almost every other state in the nation. There's only a handful of states that have a statewide system. Most still have that patchwork quilt of systems that we had back in the 90s. Missouri has been a leader and recognized as a leader in that area, not for the sake of technology, for the sake of improving our product and what we provide to the citizens of Missouri.
And you have a ton of experience in working all those years with automation and technology. You have really been on the front lines of seeing how technology can shape how we handle cases. Where are some of the areas where
Yeah.
we're talking about technological issues and AI and all these other things
Sure.
coming along? What kind of things do you see coming in the future? Is there anything that you're really excited about? Is there anything that you're a little kind of, I'm not sure this is going to work?
AI can be frightening, but it's because of the unknown. And there are lots of unknown items about AI. And we need to be cognizant of that fear of the unknown. But at the same time, we can't stick our head in the sand either. I think AI holds the long-term promise of improving the access to justice. There is a wave coming in of people that want to represent themselves. Now, that can be that they actually cannot afford lawyers, or it could be that the perception of I should be able to handle this myself. I think in the long run, AI is going to allow that person to handle much more of those legal issues on it themselves. It's not there now. It's not anywhere near that. And I want to be clear about that. You can't use Chat GPT as your lawyer. It just doesn't work. It's not that developed.
You're not likely to be successful.
That's correct.
If you're going to rely on Chat GPT.
That's exactly right. But I've heard it said in technology that we often overestimate the short-term impact of technology and underestimate the long-term impact. And I think we're in that short-term overestimation of what AI can do and the impact it will have now. In the long-term area, I think it's going to be a great tool that frees up man hours to do the things that AI cannot do, and to open up that access to justice, make available the legal precedents, the forms, everything else that's available to maybe only those who can afford it today, make all that available to those that can't afford it. And then the focus is going to shift not on whether you have access to forms, access to a particular bit of legal information or something, but you have a meritorious case. And to get to that point, it's not going to be an overnight thing, but I see a promise there in AI for that. But once again, I'm the middle of 5 kids. I was born with rosy colored glasses on. I'm the optimist, but I really think that's what we're going to be looking at in the future.
And our legal system has always been challenged by the introduction of new technology. Whenever stuff comes along, when the MRI machine was invented, when x-rays came along, the legal system always has to adapt when all of these things come into play. And we'll get there. We're usually slow. That's by design. People will complain sometimes it moves too slow. We want to make sure that we've got the right decision made, and we're going to wait until we're sure that we got it right before we start utilizing tools and things like that based on new technologies.
Justice is a human concept. It will always require a human element. Can we use AI technology to make that human decision better,
more accurate, more efficient,
more in accordance with the rule of law, which is the ultimate goal?
So a minute before you turn 70 in 2022, you retire from the bench.
Correct.
And it's crazy because since you retired in 2022, I feel like I've seen you more since you've retired from being a judge than I ever did when you actually were on the bench. Okay. What have you kept yourself busy with since you retired?
Once again, I didn't go looking for things, but they seem to have found me. And one thing that was always a frustration, both in the practice of law and on the bench, is how those with severe mental illness are dealt with by society. And we pay a high price for that because we have a patchwork quilt of trying to address and assist and help those with a severe mental illness. It seemed to me that as a society, because we didn't properly address that issue, by default, our jails and prisons became our de facto housing of some with severe mental illness, that it was so severe that it evidenced itself in some type of criminal conduct. The Missouri Behavioral Health Council received a grant from the Missouri Foundation for Health to hold a workshop in every county in the state to identify available resources in that county and to work on improving the collaboration between those available resources to address the needs of those with a severe mental illness or co-occurring disorder who were involved in the criminal justice system. The idea that we need to figure out how to break that cycle and break away from thinking that we are addressing a problem with our severely mentally ill by putting them in jail without any treatment. And I was asked to join that project, and it was a 3-year project, and we did that. We held a workshop, a day and a half workshop in all 114 counties in the state, plus the city of St. Louis, which is a city, not in a county, 115 jurisdictions. And we did a workshop for each of those jurisdictions that focused on that problem. We probably had well over 4,000 people involved in that project. And it's just amazing what that has sparked localities to assess their problem in their county and use the resources they have to address that problem and to see what additional resources do we need. It's not going to be money. It's going to be how we use the resources we have and better address those issues. And so that's been very rewarding.
You've tried to express it, but you're underselling the scope of this project. I had the privilege of participating in several of the sim mapping workshops that you put on with the organizations, and they're just mammoth undertakings. They're, as you said, the day and a half, 115 different jurisdictions, and each one of these events, these workshops, would have 20 to 50 or 60 people that would be participating for a day and a half. And it was really incredible from my perspective as a participant in those processes to see the people that you would bring together that would talk about these issues, and everybody sees the picture from a different side and didn't understand that people were seeing the picture from a different angle than they were. And once everybody got in the same room and started talking about the various angles that they're seeing the picture from, I think it started to come into more focus for folks.
And everyone has such good intentions, and they're overwhelmed from their perspective, whether it's court system, law enforcement, emergency responders, medical folks, behavioral health folks, helping organizations like the food pantries, and all of those. They were working like crazy in their own little silo, not realizing that there's a lot of other people also working with the same folks. And so bringing them together really was a rewarding experience and is still giving results of changes in how things are done. Just yesterday, I was visiting with some community behavioral health liaison and was explaining in the SIM workshop, and we had a large behavioral health provider. And in the workshop, the question was asked, how do you all coordinate and collaborate and work together not to duplicate services and how to best allocate your services? And the response we got were just silence, because they didn't. They just announced a cooperative agreement that they spent a few months working all the kinks out so that they're working in a cooperative fashion to maximize resources for the people they want to help. And so that's really rewarding.
And it's wonderful to see tangible benefits come from all the work that you've put into the project over the years. And I thank you for that and everyone that was involved with that project. It was very eye-opening, I know, from my area where I was, and I've talked to people all over the state who've raved about how much they enjoyed the process. And so since you've retired, you've been working in technology, you've been working with mental health, but you've also found your way back to the bench. What is it like being a senior judge, still handling trial cases, even this far past your 70th birthday?
I like staying involved and staying engaged, but I don't want to be a nuisance. I don't want to be a hanger-oner. I want to be helpful. And if there are holes I can plug in the surrounding counties to be helpful to the judiciary so that maybe folks get their trials set quicker and get their issues resolved a little faster, that's fine.
And I can tell you, as a former presiding judge of the circuit, I am eternally grateful to all of our senior judges in the state. Senior judges are those judges who have retired, who are still willing to come back and handle cases on an as-needed basis and cover dockets. They are doing us a favor. As a presiding judge who had cases that needed to be covered, either because we have judges that have conflicts or illnesses or whatever would come up, we would have cases that would need to be handled. And without our senior judges, we would not have been able to get those cases handled as efficiently and as quickly as we did without their assistance. So I am grateful to you and to all of the judges who are willing to come back after they've retired and help us out, because it really is a real gift to our judiciary to have your experience and your willingness to continue to help.
I don't think any senior judge goes out looking for cases, but it's that attitude of they want to help. And they've seen the need, and so there you go, where they can fit in and do it. And the nice thing about the senior judge thing is the Supreme Court or a local court will call and say, would you consider doing this? They ask, and then the senior judge can say, gosh, I'm too busy. I've got some travel plans, or I've got this or whatnot. No, I really can't do it. And they'll say, thank you for considering it, and go on to someone else. Or it may be, yes, I can fit that in, and I think that would be great. I'll be glad to help. And all the senior judges are that way. But I would want to assure the people, the appointment as a senior judge is only a year long, and the Supreme Court has to renew it every year, and they always ask for your primary care physician. So I've got to double check that they're checking on me to make sure I'm not slipping any on it.
And we appreciate your willingness to subject yourself to that and be willing to put yourself through that.
Yeah.
Thank you for the years that you have provided to our Missouri judiciary and to the citizens of the state for everything that you've done. I know I'm very grateful to have your friendship, to have your counsel. From time to time, when I've had questions, you have never shied about being willing to help me. And I think that's a wonderful place to leave our discussion about your career. One last question for you. Are you still singing?
I am still singing.
Excellent.
I'm still singing our church choir, and really am blessed by that.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Don't ever stop singing. I have a passion for music. I know you
There you
do
go.
too. Don't ever stop singing. Keep hold of that passion for music. It's a wonderful thing.
And I will say, thank you for your gracious comments and my service to the people of Missouri. But it is truly my honor, my privilege to do that. I think public service is a great calling. It's not a duty, it's not a responsibility. I think it's a calling that you feel for whatever circumstances that you can be helpful. That calling, I have felt that call, but it's been a blessing for me to answer that call, not a burden at all.
Judge Lynch, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today.
Thank you for having me.
We hope you've enjoyed our podcast today. If you have, don't forget to like and subscribe to the podcast on all your favorite platforms, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. Don't forget also to check us out and subscribe on YouTube if you'd like to see the video of these podcasts. Don't forget also to follow and subscribe to the various social media channels for the Supreme Court of Missouri as well as the Missouri courts. We'd love to hear from you. Please let us know. With nothing else to discuss today, this podcast will be adjourned. Thank you, folks.